Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Lux. Today I will be discussing the life and crimes of Ted Bundy, a serial killer most people have heard of. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24th of 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. His last name was originally Cowell. His mother, Eleanor Cowell, was a teenager when she had him. During this time, it was not acceptable for unwed women to have children, so her parents, afraid of being judged, sent her to a home for unwed mothers. On the birth certificate, Eleanor listed an Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall as the father. She later recanted this and said that the actual father was a Navy sailor named Jack Worthington. No one could find anyone in the Navy with that name. It's believed that she made it up when Lloyd said he wanted nothing to do with her or Ted. After having Ted, Eleanor was able to go back to her parents' house in Philadelphia. Ted was raised believing that his grandparents were his actual parents and that his mom was his sister. The story they had made up was that Eleanor's parents adopted Ted from an orphanage. Ted did eventually find out that Eleanor was his mother. Now, Ted's childhood was pretty normal, not too much to note. However, there was one incident when he was 3. He had placed kitchen knives all around his aunt while she was sleeping. When she woke up and saw them, Ted just started laughing. Then in 1951, his mother married John Bundy, and that's when she changed his last name to Bundy. Eleanor and John ended up having 4 kids together, and Ted had no interest in his siblings. He didn't want to play with them. He didn't want to talk to them. He basically pretended they didn't exist. Ted was very much a person who cared about what others thought of him. He always made sure that he looked good, he was well dressed, because people's impression of him mattered. So it's believed that he wasn't interested in his siblings because he wasn't a fan of his stepfather having what he deemed a unimportant job. During school, Ted was smart and popular. Things did start to change, however, when he got to high school. He was still popular because he was considered a good-looking boy, but he wasn't as popular because he was more awkward now, and when in groups, he sometimes would stutter his words. After high school, he ended up going to the college at the University of Washington in 1967. There, he met a woman named Stephanie Brooks, which is not her real name, but for her privacy, it's how we will refer to her. She had dark hair that she liked to part in the middle, which will come up later in his crimes, because a lot of his victims resembled how Stephanie looked. They ended up dating until she graduated in 1968. She broke up with him because she thought that he was immature and he just lacked direction in his life. This breakup devastated Ted. He said that he was madly in love with her. People said that the breakup depressed him, and he even ended up dropping out of college. Ted eventually went back, and he majored in psychology. This time around, he was an honor student and started getting into politics. And in '68, he started working on presidential campaigns. Ted did start a new relationship during this time with a woman named Liz Kendall, which is another fake name for privacy. She had a daughter prior to meeting him, and the two dated for 5 years. Later, she would say to police that things were weird, but she just ignored his quirks, and she didn't want to confront him. She just kind of pretended nothing weird was going on. In 1973, Ted went to the University of Utah for law school. He really was on track to becoming a lawyer or even a politician. He then met back up with Stephanie to show her the new version of himself, that he had got all his ducks in a row. He had direction in his life. The two ended up getting back together, even though he was still seeing Liz at the time. He and Stephanie ended up getting so serious and pretty fast, and even started talking about marriage. Ted ended up proposing to her, and she said yes. Then Ted just disappeared. Didn't talk to Stephanie, never reached back out to her. It turns out that all of this was just to get back at her for breaking up with him 5 years ago. In 1974, at the age of 27, he committed his first murder. Women in the area started going missing, and witnesses would say that they saw them with a handsome man, or they were going out with some guy named Ted because he always used his real name when he introduced himself. On January 4th, 1974, Karen Sparks, who was 18, was asleep in her basement apartment. She attended the University of Washington. She woke up that night to Ted beating her with a metal bar from her bed frame. She was discovered the next morning by her roommates, who said that the metal bar had been jammed inside of her. Karen survived the attack, but suffered brain damage along with damage to her internal organs. On February 1st, Linda Ann Healy, who was 21, was the first to be murdered by Ted Bundy. Ted saw her at a local bar. She was hanging out with friends that night. She ended up leaving early because she had a job at the local radio station. She was a reporter on the weather conditions for skiing, and she had to be up very early. Now, to note, Ted was an avid skier. He ended up following her back to her apartment. Now, Linda had 4 roommates who were home during this time. She ended up going to bed around 10 o'clock, and Ted broke into her bedroom and beat her with a crowbar. He then took her bloody nightgown off of her and hung it up in the closet. He put clean clothes on her and then wrapped her in a sheet with a pillowcase on her head. He remade the bed and then took her with him out the bedroom window. When she didn't show up for work the next day, her boss called her house and asked her roommates where she was. They said that she wasn't home and they didn't know where she had gone. They did end up looking in her room, and when they pulled back the comforter, they saw that the bed was covered in blood. They soon found the nightgown hanging in the closet. Unfortunately, her body has never been found. The only thing discovered was her jawbone later, that they used dental records in order to identify her. Ted used Taylor Mountain as his dump site for his victims. He ended up placing 4 victims' skulls in that area. March 12th of 1974, in Olympia, Washington, 19-year-old Donna Manson was a college student at Evergreen State. She would sometimes take off school for a few days, just kind of blow off steam, so it wasn't out of the ordinary not to hear from her. So due to this, she wasn't reporting missing until 6 days after Ted took her. Some of her remains were discovered in the Taylor Mountains, but Ted never told investigators how he killed her. On April 17th, in Ellensburg, Washington, 18-year-old Susan Rancourt was a hard-working student who had a 4.0. On that night, she went to a meeting for a job. That meeting was the last time anybody saw her. Her skull was found on Taylor Mountain as well. May 6th, in Oregon, 22-year-old Roberta Parks, who was a student at the state college. She was majoring in world religions. She was going to meet friends that night at a coffee shop, but she never made it. Her skull was found on Taylor Mountain, which was 250 miles from where she was last seen. June 1st, in Washington, 20-year-old Brenda Ball was seen leaving a tavern with a man who had his arm in a sling. Her skull was the first found by students who were exploring Taylor Mountain. Now, Ted was a necrophile, and he admitted to going back to where he hid the bodies. He said he would redress them and put makeup on them, and he said that he would have sex with them until their bodies became decomposed. Georgianne Hawkins was a freshman at the University of Washington. She was walking back to her dorm when Ted stopped her. He was faking a leg injury, and he accidentally dropped his books. Her, being a nice person, stopped to help him pick his stuff up. Once everything was picked up, he asked her if she wouldn't mind helping him get his books into his car that he had nearby. He had a beige Volkswagen Bug. She said that she would help, and when she opened the passenger door to put the books in, she noticed there wasn't a seat on the passenger side. It had been removed. Before she could think much about it, Ted hit her on the back of the head with a crowbar. He pushed her into the car. He then started driving out of town, but she woke up. She was still confused from the hit on her head, and she started talking about how she had a Spanish test that she had to prepare for. Her waking up really shocked Ted, so he pulled over and pulled her out of the car, where he then proceeded to beat her with the crowbar. Her body has never been found. July 14th of 1974, at the Lake Sammamish State Park, they were having an event that day that had around 40,000 people on the beach. It said around noon, a handsome man approached 22-year-old Mary Osmer. She was sitting in the grass when a man in a white t-shirt with his arm in a sling walked over to her. He asked her if she could help him move his sailboat. She said that she would, and she followed him to his car. She didn't see a boat, so she asked where the boat was. Ted said that they would have to actually drive up the road a little to get to the boat. Mary got a very weird feeling from this, so she said, "You know what, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I was going to help you because I thought the boat was nearby and it would be a quick thing, but I have to go meet my parents for lunch." Ted said no worries. He was nice about the whole thing and even walked her back to where she had been sitting, and he thanked her for trying to help anyway. He then just walked away. He actually ended up asking this question to several women that day, who also turned him down once they realized that they would have to get in a car with him to get to this so-called boat. Later that day, he approached 23-year-old Janice Ott. She had recently moved to the area to work with children. She had rode her bike to the beach that day just to hang out and get some sun. Ted walked up to her and introduced himself and asked if she could help him with this boat. She agreed. When they got to his car and she saw that there wasn't a boat, but before she could really say anything about it, he punched her in the face. He then put her in the car where he strangled her. He then drove her into the woods, tied her up, and left her. He then went back to the beach and walked up to 18-year-old Denise Naslund. She was there with some friends and had just walked off to use the bathroom. He told her the same story, that he had needed help moving this boat, and she said that she would help him. He ended up taking her to the woods where he had tied up Janice, and he beat them both before killing them. Denise's jawbone and femur were the only parts of her to ever be found. Now, when Ted had originally taken Janice, there were 3 women nearby that overheard the conversation they were having, and they heard him say that his name was Ted and even saw the car that he drove. A lot of people heard his name that day, and they did tell the police the information they had. Police ended up getting a sketch of what he looked like, along with his first name and the car that he drove, and they asked public for help. They ended up setting up a tip line, and they ended up getting around 200 tips a day, but the first sketch didn't actually look anything like Ted. But on the other hand, even though he was said to be handsome, Ted was a very generic-looking man. One of the tips that came in was from Ted's psychology teacher, who said that he had a weird guy in his class that kind of matched the new sketch that they had put out, and he said his name was Ted Bundy. The next tip that they got was from his actual girlfriend, Liz. She called the line after seeing the sketch and hearing about the kind of car and that he went by the name Ted. She told them that she believed they were looking for her boyfriend, Ted Bundy. She said that he had been acting strange lately and staying up all night. He would leave at odd hours and not say where he was going, and that their sex had changed. Lately, he only wanted to have sex if he could tie her up, and he would get very angry if she told him no. Now, around the time that this tip line had been set up, the remains were being found on Taylor Mountain. This is where they found the skulls of 4 of his victims. A month after killing the 2 women at the beach, Ted ended up going to Utah for law school. Now, police had his name from the tips that came in, but he soon left town. And after he left, women stopped disappearing or ending up dead. But women did start coming up dead in Utah. On October 2nd, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox disappeared from Holiday, Salt Lake City, Utah. She was last seen in the passenger seat of a beige VW Bug. After his arrest, he did claim her as one of his victims. He said her body was about 200 miles south of Salt Lake City, but didn't say exactly where, so her body was never recovered. 17-year-old Melissa Smith was the daughter of the police chief. She had been raped, sodomized, and strangled to death by Ted. Her body was found 9 days after she disappeared. 17-year-old Laura Aim disappeared on Halloween night. Her remains were found on the bank of a river on Thanksgiving. On November 8th, Carol DeRanch, who was 18, was being stalked by Ted Bundy. He was following her around the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. He even wrote down her license plate number. As she was leaving the mall that day, Ted approached her and pretended to be a cop. He said somebody had tried to break into her car and he needed her to fill out a police report. He said he would give her a ride to the police station to get it all sorted. She did ask to see his badge, and he pulled one out. She didn't feel safe and she didn't want to go with him. Her gut was saying that something wasn't quite right, but he showed her a badge, so she thought he was a real cop and went with him. She ended up seeing that they were walking towards a VW Bug, not a police cruiser, and she asked why. He told her that he was undercover at the moment. He had ended up putting the passenger seat back in the car at this time, so they started driving, and Carol soon noticed that they weren't heading in the direction of the police station. She started to freak out, so he pulled over and tried to handcuff her. She fought him, and he accidentally put the handcuffs on the same wrist. She was able to get out of the car before he realized his mistake, and she ran like hell. He didn't chase after her, though. He instead just drove away to Viewmont High School. There happened to be a play that night, and people remember seeing a man pacing the parking lot, visibly agitated, when they were leaving the school. He kept approaching random people, trying to use the lie of him being a police officer. He finally was able to convince 17-year-old Deborah Kent to go with him. She was never seen again. The only evidence that they found at the school were the keys to the handcuffs that were on Carol. Carol reported what happened and told police everything she could about him. After this, Ted made his way to Colorado in 1975, where 5 women were murdered after his arrival. He soon dropped out of law school. On January 12th of 1975, in Aspen, Colorado, 23-year-old Caroline Campbell, who was a nurse in Michigan, was on vacation with her fiancé and his 2 children. She disappeared from their hotel room. Her body was found in a snowbank on Owl Creek Road on February 18th. On March 15th, in Vail, Colorado, 26-year-old Julie Cunningham, who was a ski instructor, was getting ready to meet up with friends at a bar, but she never made it. Her body has never been found. Ted confessed to killing her right before his execution. April 6th, in Grand Junction, Colorado, Denise Oliverson had a fight with her husband. To blow off some steam, she left to go to her parents' house. Ted abducted her before she could get there. Her husband reported her missing after hearing that she had never made it to her parents. Ted said that he threw her body into the Colorado River. Her body has never been found. On May 6th, in Pocatello, Idaho, 12-year-old Lynette Culver was abducted from school by Ted. He said he put her body in Snake River. It has also never been found. On June 28th, in Provo, Utah, 15-year-old Susan Curtis disappeared from Brigham University. Ted said he buried her 75 miles away, but nobody could find her body. On August 16th of 1975, in Salt Lake City, Officer Haywood saw a VW Bug driving through a neighborhood, and it caught his attention because the car had gone by a few times. This was a small area, and Officer Haywood was very familiar with the people in the area and what was going on in the town. He remembered that there was a house nearby with 2 teenage girls alone since their parents were out of town. He attempted to pull over the car, and there was a small chase before Ted finally pulled over. Officer Haywood walked up to the car and noticed that the passenger seat was missing, along with the door handle. He asked Ted what he was doing in the area, and he said that he was going to see the movie Towering Inferno. Now, like I said, Haywood knows his town very well, and he knew that that movie wasn't playing at the theater. With all of this information and the sketchiness of what Ted was doing, Haywood had probable cause to search the car. And when he did, he found a kit. Inside of this kit was a ski mask, a nylon mask, handcuffs, gloves, a crowbar, an ice pick, rope, trash bags, and tape. He immediately arrested Ted. When they got back to the police station, they decided to do a lineup because he matched the description that Carol had gave of the man who tried to abduct her. She immediately picked him out of this lineup, and he was soon arrested. Other states realized that once Ted was in the system, that he was the man that they were looking for. They soon interviewed Liz. She told them that he had a hatchet under his seat all of the time in the car, and that he had crutches at the house that he never needed. He never had an injury that required them. And she said that he had also bought materials to make fake casts for like your arms or your legs when you break them. Ted was soon sent to Utah State Prison. Police started making connections that he had murdered women in multiple states. They ended up searching his apartment, and they found things like the brochure from the high school play where Deborah was taken from. There was hair and other items from missing women. After a year in prison, Ted's trial was set to start. And because he had gone to law school for a little bit but didn't graduate, Ted thought that it was in his best interest to represent himself. He demanded that the court treat him differently and that he wouldn't be shackled because he was acting as his own attorney. It was agreed that he wouldn't need to be shackled during the trial, and he took advantage of this. During a recess, he asked to go to the law library, which he was escorted to with guards. He immediately jumped out of a second-story window and ran into the woods. And he stayed there for about 6 days before he stole a car and was pulled over for driving erratically. He was taken back into custody. 7 months later, he was able to get his hands on a hacksaw and $500 from his admirers. He made a small hole in the ceiling of his cell. He ended up losing 35 pounds in a short period of time to be able to fit through the hole that he had made. On New Year's Eve, he crawled through the hole, and it led to the head jailer's room, who was out for the night for the New Year's celebrations. He ended up putting on the jailer's clothes and just walked right out of the prison. Now, due to low staff, because of the holiday, no one noticed he was missing until the next day. He made his way to Chicago, where he got on a train to Michigan. Then he stole a car and went to Atlanta and took a bus to Florida. Once in Florida, he planned to keep a low profile and just kind of live a normal life. But that didn't work out so much since he didn't have any identification to get a real job. He ended up renting a room in a boarding house. He pretended to be a grad student named Chris Hagen, and he went to classes like everybody else. However, Ted couldn't change his ways. He continued killing. On January 15th of 1978, Ted went to a club. He was trying to pick up girls, but because he was coming off so creepy, no one was entertaining him. He started getting mad at the rejection, and before going to the club that night, he had noticed that the Chi Omega sorority house next door happened to have an unlocked door. He waited until he thought everyone was asleep. He picked up a log from the front yard and went inside the house, and he went insane. 21-year-old Margaret Bowman was the first one he came across. He beat her with the log until her skull caved in. He then wrapped a nylon stocking around her throat so tight that it almost broke her neck. Next was 20-year-old Lisa Levy. She was found in her room alive, but unfortunately died on the way to the hospital. She had been strangled, and her collarbone had been broken, and a spray bottle had been forced inside of her. Ted even left a bite mark on her butt that helped convict him later. 21-year-old Karen Chandler survived this night. Ted beat her with a log and thought that she was dead when he left. Her skull was fractured, her jaw was broken, and he had even knocked out some of her teeth. 21-year-old Kathy Kleiner was found sitting up in her bed. He had hit her in the face multiple times with a log. She survived, but due to the head injuries, she couldn't remember what happened. Ted ended up taking the log with him when he left, and a woman returning to the house that night saw him holding it. A man down the road also said that he could see that there was a guy walking down the street carrying a log. Ted then broke into the basement apartment of 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas. He beat her, and her screams woke up the neighborhood. They could hear him hitting her, but nobody came to stop him. She had multiple skull fractures, a broken jaw, and a dislocated shoulder, but she survived the attack. He then went back to the boarding house like nothing happened. His roommate said that he was talking crazy and he just seemed insane. February 9th, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach was at school. She asked her teacher if she could get her purse that she had left in her previous class. She was then seen being led off school grounds by a man. Nobody reported this because they assumed it was her father. However, when her actual father was told that she had missed the last half of her classes and that she had left with a man, he called the police and reported her as kidnapped. 2 months later, her body was found in a pig pen, 40 miles from the school. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Ted was eventually arrested again and decided to represent himself, which means he was allowed to cross-examine the witnesses and his victims that had survived. He was sentenced to death row. On the day of his execution, people were camped out hoping to watch. The closer he got to his execution, the more that he fought to not die. He started blaming porn for his actions, saying that it wasn't his fault, but nothing he could say would change that on January 24th of 1989, he was executed in the electric chair. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the case and everybody stays safe. I'll be talking to you next week.